Hi everyone and welcome to Germany for Student channel. Today is 12th lesson of A2 level of German language course, and today we are going to continue the topic of adjectives. In today's lesson we will cover the comparative form of adjective, and we will see that how we can make this comparative form, what is the use of this comparative form, and where we can use this comparative form of adjectives. So let's start with the lesson. In the first part of today's lesson, we will learn how to make the comparative form of adjectives. There are different ways to make a comparative form of adjectives. So if we have one adjective like klein, and if we want to make a comparative form of klein, we simply have to add an er, or in German language ar, at the end of the adjective, and by doing so we will make the comparative form of adjective. So in English language we have small, smaller. In German we have klein, which is the basic form or the main form of the adjective, and if we add an er at the end of klein, it will become the comparative form of adjective, and it means smaller. Similarly, if we have adjective schnell, which means fast, in order to make the comparative form, we simply have to add er at the end of adjective. So the comparative form of schnell is schneller. If the adjective is schön, which means beautiful, we simply add an er, or in German ar, at the end, and it becomes schöner, which means more beautiful. Heiß means hot, heißer means hotter. So again, we have followed the same rule. Hell, which means bright. If we want to make a comparative form, we simply have to add er and it becomes heller, which means brighter. Niedrig means low. This is the main form. And if we want to make a comparative form of this adjective, it will be niedriger, niedriger, which means lower. Billig means cheap. The comparative form of billig is billiger, which means cheaper. Einfach, simple or easy. Its comparative form is einfacher. So here we have covered all these adjectives which can be formed by simply adding an er at the end of the main form of adjective. Let's move to another way of making the comparative form. If we have an adjective arm, which means poor, in order to make a comparative form, we not only have to add an er at the end of arm, rather we have to replace a, or in German language a, with a. Next, jung, which means young. In order to make the comparative form, we have to not only add er at the end of jung, rather we also have to replace simple u with u umlaut. Alt, which means old. In order to make comparative form of this adjective, we have to add er at the end and we have to replace a with an a. Lang, which means long. The comparative form is länger. So again, we have to add an er at the end and we have to replace a with a. Warm, which means warm. In order to make the comparative form, we have to add er at the end and we have to replace a with a. So it becomes wärmer. Kurs, which means short. The comparative form is kürzer. Again, we have replaced u with u umlaut. Kalt, which means cold. The comparative form is kälter. Schwach, which means weak. The comparative form is schwächer. Groß, which means big. The comparative form is grosser. So this is the second rule of making comparative form of adjective, where we not only have to add an er at the end of basic form of adjective. Rather, we also have to replace the simple alphabet with the corresponding alphabet with umlaut. Now, next we look at the irregular adjectives, and we see that how to make the comparative form of these irregular adjectives. So the first example is good, which means good. The irregular comparative form of good is besser. Like in English, we have better. In German, it's besser. Viel mehr. Hoch, höher. Now let's have a look at another way of making comparative form of irregular adjectives. If we have an adjective like dunkel, the comparative form of dunkel will be dunkler. So what we have done here is we have simply removed the E which is coming before L, and we have added ER at the end. So it becomes dunkler, which means darker. Teuer, which means expensive. If we want to make a comparative form of this adjective teuer, we simply have to remove E before R, and we have to add an ER at the end of teuer, which means more expensive. Sauer again has an E before R. So what we do in order to make the comparative form is to remove this E and add an ER at the end of sauer. So these are different ways of making comparative forms of adjectives. Now let's have a look at the use of this comparative form so that we can see where we can use this comparative form in our sentences. In lesson number 11, we went through 3 different cases. In the first case, the first level of comparison is that we compared the characteristic of 2 things, and both things have same level of in the characteristic that we are comparing. So if we compare the newness of 2 cars, both cars are new. In case number 2, which is the topic of today's lesson, my car is newer than his car. So we are again comparing the newness, but my car is newer than his car. And this form newer is the comparative form of adjective new. So this is what we will learn in today's lesson, how we can use this in German language. If I have an example, the coat is more beautiful than the jacket. So in English language, we use the comparative form of beautiful, which is more beautiful, and then we use than, which means that we are comparing 2 things, but one thing is more beautiful than the other thing. In German language, we will say, der Mantel ist schöner als die Jacke. Now, what we have done is we have used der Mantel because Mantel is a masculine noun. Therefore, we will use der Mantel. Then comes ist, which is the conjugation of sein verb with respect to der Mantel. Then we use the comparative form of adjective, more beautiful. And in German language, it's schöner. We have learned it already. And then we will use als in place of then. And after that, the second object will come that we are comparing, which is die Jacke in this case. Because Jacke is a feminine noun, therefore we will use die Jacke. And we will follow the same pattern for comparison in the next examples. Berlin is bigger than Hamburg. Now in this sentence, we are comparing the size of 2 cities, and we are saying that Berlin is bigger than Hamburg. Therefore, we are using comparative form of adjective big, which is in English language bigger. So how can we say it in German language? Berlin ist größer als Hamburg. So we have followed the same sentence structure that we have followed in the first example, that Berlin comes at the first position It is the first thing that we are comparing. Then comes sein verb, which is conjugated according to subject Berlin and it has become ist. Then comes the comparative form of adjective, which is grosser for bigger. And in place of then in German language, we use als. And then comes the second object that we are comparing. Next example, the train travels faster than the car. In German language, der Zug fährt schneller als das Auto. Again, Zug is a masculine noun, therefore it has article der Zug. At second position, we always use verb and it is conjugated according to subject der Zug. So fahren becomes fährt. Then comes the comparative form of adjective. The comparative form of schnell is schneller. So we will use this. And in place of then, we will use als in German language. And at the end, we will use the second object that is being compared. The second object is das Auto because auto is a neuter noun. So we will use das Auto. In Kiel, it's often 10 degrees colder than in Essen. Again, we are comparing the temperature or the coldness in two cities. And we are saying that one city has more temperature than the other, or one city is colder than the other city. In Kiel ist es oft 10 Grad kälter als in Essen. The shirt costs more than the jacket. Das Hemd kostet mehr als die Jacke. Again, das Hemd comes at the first position. At second position, we have used verb kosten, which means to cost, and it is conjugated according to das Hemd, so it becomes kostet. Then for more, we have adjective mehr, which is in comparative form, and in place of then, we will use als in German language, and at the last position, we will use the second object which we are comparing, and the second object is die Jacke. I find Munich better than Berlin. München gefällt mir besser als Berlin. München comes at first position. At second position, we have used gefallen verb, and if we conjugate it with respect to München, it becomes gefällt. And because gefallen is a dative verb, therefore we have used mir. Besser is the comparative form of gut in German language. And after that, we will use als. And after als, we will use the second object which is being compared. In this case, it's Berlin. So München and Berlin are being compared. So this is how we can use the comparative form of adjective. We have seen different ways of making comparative form, and we have seen the use of comparative form in German language with the help of different examples. I hope the topic is clear to you. If you still have any questions, just put them in the comment and see you in the next video. Bye.